So we get a lot of questions at Tye-Dyed Iguana, and perhaps the number one question we get is, why won't my animal eat? So this is a wildly complex question because there are a huge array of answers, and it depends what species of animal you're looking at. So I'm going to try to kind of like hit your generalizations on why your animal wouldn't eat. I'll touch on a couple animals. I'm standing here next to a bearded dragon tank for 2 reasons, maybe 3 reasons. First of all, it looks really nice. Second of all, it's right in the front of the store in a well-lit area, which makes for good video. But number 3, bearded dragons are pretty darn popular, and we get this question a lot. So why won't my bearded dragon eat? The number one thing that we check anytime any animal won't eat is lighting and heating. Sometimes they're all one of the same, but lighting and heating. So a bearded dragon, in particular, if this guy isn't eating or not eating, the first thing I'm going to check is UVB output and temperature. Now we're using an all-in-one bulb here. With a diurnal species, diurnal means awake during the day, if they don't have access to that UVB, they can't metabolize their calcium properly. So their body begins to suck calcium from their bones. It's a very layman's way to explain it, but think osteoporosis. When that's happening to this animal, it's going to tend to cause a lot of stress, and when an animal gets stressed, they won't eat. So I always check the UVB first and foremost. Number 2, it's really almost synonymous with the UVB issue, is heat. If the bearded dragon is too hot, he's going to go into a defensive mechanism and not eat and just try to conserve. If he's too cold, he'll do the same thing. So really with any animal in here, whether it be a bearded dragon, a Russian tortoise, a ball python, the first things you're going to check are lighting and heat. So if it's diurnal, check that UVB first and then check the heat. Now don't discredit one. If you check the UVB and it's bad, don't say, I've solved the problem. You know, it's UVB, because it might be both. It could be heat and UVB. If it's a nocturnal animal, you're only going to have to check heat, obviously, so just let's see what's going on there. So that's the number one question, is heat and UVB. The second thing I'm typically going to look at with, and this is going to sound really dumb, all right? This is going to sound really dumb. But if the animal's not eating, is I always check the light cycle. Oftentimes, we're still by the beardies, so we use this as an example. Oftentimes people just leave the light on 24/7. They don't actually think anything of it. In being a diurnal species, they need to have a natural light cycle. So regarding light cycle with nocturnal animals, what could really come into play is how you're providing the heat and through which style light bulb. So the marbled gecko, for instance, this is a nocturnal species. What we have going on here is we have an LED light that we use for visual light during the day, and it helps the plants grow. And then in here, this is going to be a little unique, I have an infrared heat lamp. So we also have what appears to be a low-level UVB bulb. Now this is a nocturnal species, it does not require the UVB, but we use that low-level UVB as an antimicrobial. But what we have is the infrared lamp. So with a nocturnal animal, a lot of people will use that infrared lamp and they will run it 24/7 so they can provide that heat source 24/7. What if, however, somebody was using a daytime heat lamp on this nocturnal animal and they ran it 24/7? Well, for that nocturnal animal, they'll never get the visual break from the light, and then that'll cause them to stress out, and then they'll typically stop eating. So all of that kind of goes back to light cycle and why the light cycle would be important. So number 1, UVB and temperature, lighting. Number 2, that light cycle, which kind of all wraps into number 1. So to be completely honest, when someone's animal is not eating, 9.5 times out of 10, that is going to completely solve the problem. Very rarely do we have to escalate past that point. However, you may need to escalate. So a couple things that would be worth noting, kind of slide over here. Humidity. If you have a tropical animal such as the green tree python and you're keeping it very dry, it's not going to eat, primarily because it won't shed properly. Crested geckos. Sometimes people, we have cresties right here, sometimes people don't keep the humidity high enough, and the animal will stress out and then it won't eat. Crusteds will also burrow in the ground if the humidity is too low because they're trying to stay moist and keep that level up. Once you've kind of looked at the humidity, after that, bedding plays a role. I know it sounds crazy, but there are some beddings that are wildly toxic to reptiles that you wouldn't assume are toxic. Pine and cedar being 2 of the big ones. But pine and cedar are very potent aromatically, and that's very stressful for the animal, which could cause them to stop eating. A couple other things that are worth noting are appropriate tank size. For instance, if you have an adult bearded dragon in a 10-gallon tank, he's probably going to stress out. When they stress out, they don't eat. But you know, we're getting really like down into the weeds here. Lastly, I would actually look at what you're trying to feed the animal. So for instance, if we're troubleshooting a bearded dragon, and you know what? I have a real life example for you. About 17 years ago when we first opened, we had somebody with a green iguana that they were feeding pizza to. Do you remember this, cameraman? Were you here for this?
I don't know.
I kid you not, they were feeding pizza to the animal. That was a pretty easy one to troubleshoot. We're just like, hey, generally pizza is not, you know, designed for green iguana consumption. But what it's eating is typically the last thing that I'll even look at, because you're going to usually find that it's an environmental issue. So something that can also cause an animal not to eat that is completely unrelated to the environment. Notice we've been talking environment the whole time. But worth noting is brumation and egg development. Brumation is kind of, it's like a soft hibernation. When an animal hibernates, they go down for the winter and they're down. Brumation is when an animal slows down in the winter. 50% of the time when someone's animal is in brumation, it's not actually in brumation. Usually their UVB is expired and their cage is too cool, which gives you a false sense of brumation. But if your animal is truly brumating, which means your environment is where it needs to be and the animal slows down, that's natural, nothing to worry about. And then lastly, if you have a female that is developing eggs, they will typically go off feed. And that's something that we could look at here for you at Tye-Dyed Iguana, free of charge. Otherwise, if you intentionally bred the animal, then you probably know that your female is developing eggs. So wrapping it up, your primary causes for your animal not to eat are going to be number one, environment. Always check that first. Go through the checklist that I just gave you. We will happily go through that checklist for you at the store at Tye-Dyed Iguana, free of charge. But if you go through that checklist, make sure that those answers that you get on those questions match what the animal should have. Then you can, you know, troubleshoot that and rule that out. And then secondly, brumation and egg development, two things that can definitely throw a wrench in the system when it comes to your animal eating.